Welcome to Mrs. Feighery's Chapter 30 of The American Pageant, The War to End Wars, and we'll be discussing in this video World War I. On January 22, 1917, Woodrow Wilson made a final attempt to avert war and to maintain the neutrality that he had been attempting to maintain, delivering a moving address that correctly declared only a peace without victory, meaning that he wanted to beat Germany without embarrassing them. Germany responded by shocking the world, announcing that it would break the Sussex Pledge and return to unrestricted submarine warfare, which meant that the U-boats would now be firing on armed and unarmed ships in the war zone. Wilson asked Congress for the authority to arm merchant ships, but a band of Midwestern senators tried to block this measure from taking place. The Zimmermann Note was also a cause of the United States entering the war. This note was intercepted and published on March 1, 1917. It was written by German Foreign Secretary Arthur Zimmermann, and it secretly proposed an alliance between Germany and Mexico. It proposed that if Mexico fought against the United States and the Central Powers won, then Mexico could recover Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona from the United States. The Germans also began to make good on their threats, sinking numerous ships. Meanwhile, in Russia, a revolution, called the Bolshevik Revolution, toppled the Tsarist regime. On April 2, 1917, President Wilson asked Congress to declare war, which it did 4 days later, and Wilson had lost his gamble at staying out of the war. This is the Zimmermann Note, which we'll be discussing in class. Many people still didn't want to enter the war, for America had prided itself in isolationism for decades, and now Wilson was entangling America in a distant war. 6 senators and 50 representatives, including the first Congresswoman, Jeannette Rankin, voted against the war. To gain enthusiasm for the war, Wilson came up with the idea of America entering the war to make the world safe for democracy. This idealistic motto worked brilliantly, but with the new American zeal came the loss of Wilson's earlier motto, which was peace without victory. On January 8, 1917, Wilson delivered his 14 points address to Congress. These 14 points would later attempt to become the basis for the treaty at the end of the war. The 14 points were a set of idealistic goals for peace. The main points were: no more secret treaties, freedom of the seas was to be maintained, a removal of economic barriers among nations so that nations could trade freely with one another, a reduction of armament burdens, and an adjustment of colonial claims in the interests of natives and colonizers, self-determination or independence for many oppressed minority groups who'd choose their government, and finally, the centerpiece, which was the League of Nations, an international organization that would keep the peace and settle world disputes. The Committee on Public Information, headed by George Creel, was created to help sell the war to those people who were against it in the United States or to just simply gain support for it. The Creel organization sent out an army of 75,000 men to deliver speeches in favor of the war, showering millions of pamphlets containing the most potent Wilsonisms among the world, splashed posters and billboards that had emotional appeals, and showed anti-German movies like The Kaiser, which you can see an advertisement for here, and another play or movie called The Beasts of Berlin. There were also patriotic songs, but Creel did err in that he oversold some of these ideas, and the result at the end of the war would mean disillusionment for the Americans. Germans in America were surprisingly loyal to the U.S., but nevertheless, many Germans were blamed for espionage activities, and a few were actually tarred, feathered, and beaten. The Espionage Act of 1917 and the Sedition Act of 1918 showed American fears and paranoia about Germans and others perceived as a threat. These resulted in a violation of civil liberties. The anti-war socialists and members of the Radical Union Industrial Workers of the World, the IWW, which was a labor union, were often prosecuted, including the socialist Eugene V. Debs and the IWW leader William D. Haywood, who were actually arrested during this time period, convicted, and sent to prison. Fortunately, after the war, there were presidential pardons from Warren G. Harding, but a few people still sat in jail into the 1930s. These are also a violation of their civil liberties. And this is the works cited page. All images in this presentation are from the public domain.